So we're talking about Tilos today, which is a piece of software, and it's only appropriate where you've got distance involved really in the project. So Tilos stands for time and location schedule or software, but it also includes the ability to have resource, costs, and progress. So my name's Richard Ormer. I've got a background in the construction industry. I've been involved in planning systems and I've got a degree in construction, run building sites, been a planner, but I'm now involved in the software side. So I'm pretty sure that you all know why you're here, but just in case you don't, so you will be using traditional systems which our French colleagues like to condescendingly call Anglo-Saxon planning systems, where we've got two activities which we link together. We represent that in a node diagram or a precedence diagram, but nobody ever demonstrates it that way because it's just doesn't communicate. So people always show it against a time scale as a Gantt chart, a bar chart, so people can visually see that the activity B follows A both in start and finish. So when you are in a project that's got distance component, you've got an extra dimension to play with, and it doesn't matter to Tilos which way around these axes are. So our continental cousins prefer to have distance vertically and time horizontally. We can do that. We can also switch the axes around with just a click of a button. So you might want to be planning to demonstrate that you're doing this railway from London to Brighton, or you might want to say, well, we want to show it from Brighton to London. So we can just reverse the axis. Same with time. You could have the start at the top and cascade down to the bottom, which is probably the most common, but some people like to have it the other way up. But then, of course, we're going to position the same activities that we had on the bar chart, but we see a bit more information about them, and this is why people like to use the technique, because if somebody said to you, when will I get to 1 kilometer, you wouldn't be able to tell them that from a bar chart. But in a time distance diagram, you can see where you will be in distance at any time. And you've also got the ability to have a different rate of production. So you can start off a bit slower as you go up through a learning curve, and then you can increase productivity. And you can demonstrate that in a way that you can't demonstrate in a bar chart. And of course, then you've got that same activity, second activity following A, both in start and finish. But because of that change in production, we got a problem. 2 machines have crashed into each other. People are in hospital. We want to avoid that situation. So in Tilos, we've got the ability to stop these things clashing. We can find out where they're clashing, and you can resolve them in the source software, or you can resolve them directly in Tilos. So and then you've got some physical obstructions which are quite common, things like bird nesting seasons, difficult areas that you can't get onto that piece of land for a certain period, and we can solve that problem elegantly in a way that you just wouldn't really be able to approach in a Anglo-Saxon planning system. So that's the reason why people do it, or want to do it, or when they have done it, they appreciate the benefits that brings. But there's 2 aspects of Tilos that I want to just explain to put a picture in your mind. So when we use the software, we can set it in a little context, and one is something called views, which in P6 you would recognize. Well, the most similar thing is a layout. So we can have different views that we can create in advance or as we go along, but these are very graphical. So Tilos is sort of half P6, half AutoCAD. So we create a view made up of cells, and we say how big that cell is going to be. So we've probably got a page size in mind at this point, and so we create the first cell. You've got to have at least 1 cell, and that's got my time distance information in it, and these will come back to this is why we've got different shapes and colors. But this cell, when we create it, this is when we say what is the primary axis. In this case, time is vertical, so that big blue stripe is a holiday period. And then I create a second cell on top of the first one. It's a distance cell. And in there, I create my own distance ruler. So I can have as many rows as I want, different tick marks on each row, different values, different colored bands. I can have another distance cell. I can have as many cells as I want. And in here, I've placed a map. I could have a time cell on in any place. And in here, I create my own time ruler. So I can have as many columns as I want, representing whatever I want, including your own made up week numbers, like if you're working for Network Rail, for example. You can have a different time cell, and we can demonstrate the use of individual resources and show heat maps about what the numbers are. And you can also have a period histogram showing you cumulative and period totals of both man hours, money, cubic meters of spoil, whatever you want to represent in that area, provided that quantity is allocated to the activities. So you can also have irregular objects on the distance scale. So these could be bridges, stations, those sort of things, and that's very commonly used to help communicate. And you can graph on the distance axis as well. So there are some, and you have a bar chart, a Gantt chart on the distance axis, which has got some very interesting uses, particularly in pipelines. And there's a specialist mass hall module buried in there as well, which I will talk about. So around the outside of that, we've got a surrounding cell that's got to be there. We can make that a graphic cell. We can embed a legend that's representing what these different patterns and colors are on the body of the diagram, and they are the activities themselves, and to which we have given a shape and a color. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So you don't have to describe what they are, because you can see that the yellow rectangles are drainage. So do we need to say that it's drainage because we can see it's a yellow rectangle? So, and it's good to standardize its appearance so that if you're working on different jobs, all drains are always going to be yellow rectangles. So we can have title blocks. You can create your own, of course. You can embed a bit of Excel that I'm going to do, any number of logos, and all of that is a view, and it's got a name, and that's what you're going to see when you print it out. You can also have spreadsheets, and you can have Gantt charts, but this is primary. But a view can also have filters, so you can strip out certain activities, but you can also have a time slice. So I only want to see things happening in October and November, and I only want to see things that are happening between 1.5 and 2.5 kilometers. So that would be a different view. So you don't have to see the whole thing. You can say what's happening in the next 6 months, and you can have what's happening from 6 months onwards at a different scale, all scrunched up at the bottom of the screen. So there are some very advanced possibilities. So that's views. So we're going to be using views in the demonstration. I'm not going to create one, but you'll see the range of possibilities. So the other important thing is about activities, tasks in Tilos. They are exactly the same as you would find in P6, Microsoft Project, Power Project, any of these things. They've got a start and end date, logic, links, resources, cost, WBS structures, activity codes, calendars, but they must have a start and end distance. You have got to give them a start and end distance. When you use Tilos, you're naturally giving it to them because it's the way you use it. But if you're using an external system, you need to type it into 2 columns, and we will cover the subject of import, export, and talk about your primary system P6. So a number of tasks go to make up a project. Strictly speaking, a sub-project, which is a subtly different thing to a different part of the work breakdown structure. A sub-project in Tilos is a different chainage regime. So that would be a side road, for example, or a slip road. So not on the main chainage regime. A number of sub-projects can be displayed in a view, as we've just talked about, but the important point is when you make a new activity in Tilos, you are basing it on a task template that has previously been created. So this is like a library, and the nearest thing in P6 are activity codes, but a library of processes that and to which we can give a shape and a color. So if I have create a task template called drains and I say it's a yellow rectangle, I choose what task template I'm going to use when I either create it or import it, and it will appear as a yellow rectangle. So we need one reference to what the task template is. Task templates are more sophisticated than that, and some people make heavy use of that, and I will refer to that at the end about rail use, in that it can be given preset a rate of production, and you can also preload it with resources and costs, and you can have a group of those, so you can have a fragnet of different ways of doing standard things already made, all logic linked, resourced, productivity rates, and you can create a whole section of a program or a whole program in one operation, which again I'll touch on at the end. But this concept of a task template having a shape and a color is the bit that I want you to grasp now. So that's all the talking I'm going to do with PowerPoint. I'm now going to turn to the product itself. So it's quite sparse when you start it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project from scratch. So this is not like P6 where this is where you've got a central database of many projects in one collection. This is more like Excel where you've got standalone files and you could email them around. And when you start one, we can base it on a template, something that we've created before. And I would urge you to make a template because it saves everybody a lot of time, because we can pre-create things like views, task template libraries, calendars, etc. So I'm going to base this on one that we've done before, and so when it starts, it wants us to know what is the name of the project that you're currently planning to do. So I'm going to dual carriageway bit A44. What's the distance values? What's the measurement we want to create? And we can create our own units if we want to. I'm going to use meters. So we need to give the footprint of what the distance values are and what is the first date and last date we want to represent. And I'm going to just jump into the future and say I want to represent something that starts on the 4th of January, and Tilos makes a bit more about time, minutes and seconds than P6 does. So we do need to keep that in mind. And I want that to go to, and so we could also got a date picker, years across the top, months down the side, so we can pick any day in a decade easily. What's our time unit? So we're going to be thinking about days, but we might be thinking about minutes if we were doing an overnight possession work. What should our standard calendar be? But this is for a period. So this is, and we'll come to that. So different tasks can have different calendars. So when I say apply at that point, I'm going to save this somewhere on my drive that I can get to. And then we have a number of areas on screen. So I just want to spend a moment looking at the user interface before diving in to use it. So there are really three main areas of the screen. There's this area on the left hand side over here, which we call the Explorer. So this is where we list all of our views. This is where all the data resides in either relate to the project or possibly useful across different projects. And it just expands and contracts, as you can imagine. You can change the size of that. And on the right hand side is the time distance diagram, or whatever it happens to be that we're working on. And we're trying to make this as large as possible. And having two screens, having a high resolution monitor is pretty essential when you're using these things, because they can be really big. And at the bottom of the screen are a number of tabs that respond to whatever you click on in the time distance diagram or in the Explorer. So wherever you click, you get different set of tabs down below. And then there are a fleet of toolbar buttons, all of which give you tips if you hover on them. So the ones down the center are all for doing things on the body of the diagram. and then along the top you've got a whole group on the left hand side, which are all sort of housekeeping: open, save, redo, undo, move views. And then you've got a bit in the middle all about changing the zoom scale on screen. So we can say, well, I want to zoom it down, or I want to zoom it out or in, and you can use the wheel mouse button to do that. We can pan it left and right, and obviously as well as the scale bars, and then you've got some other ancillary things. So hopefully you'll put that in context as I start using it. So just to sort of introduce some concepts. So I've got a cell up here, and I can make these cells as big as I want. This is my view that I've got in my list of views, and we'll use a few views. And I've pre-created my rulers, and we can change those on the tabs down below. So I could change the interval to be every 250 meters instead of every 500, for example, or some massive amount if I'm not looking what I'm doing. But in this cell above, I want to embed a map, so we can bring in a graphic that we've got externally or internally within Tilos. And so we click on this button, which is import graphic. Do we want to scale it? Well, in this case, it's a distance, so I do want to scale it. I can make these settings after I've imported it, and then I just draw a box, and in that box I can choose to bring a graphic from various sources. So we can have a symbol library, and I will touch on that because that's mainly used in the rail industry. At the end, we can have graphics within Tilos, and there, if you're going to use them more than once, essentially, or I can bring it in from a file on disk. Which I'm going to do. So I've got a map called road horizontal, and so then we get these blue editing handles around the selected objects. The tabs below are about the object itself, and this is such a common feature of Tilos, the way you interact with it, the blue editing handles. So with a 4-headed arrow, you can move it without changing its scale. With a 2-headed arrow, you can scale it. You can pick up the vertical stick and move it in that direction, or the horizontal stick and move it in that direction. So you can locate it wherever you want. There are techniques if it's linear, but this one isn't linear. So we've got a linear job, we've got a non-linear picture. So, we go around a curve here. So there are techniques where you can draw graphic lines and say, well, this point here is connected to this point here. And it would be quite useful if we gave that line a color, and we can give it lots of different line styles and such. So there are many techniques. So and on the right hand side, I've got this sort of blank area which I want to use as a sort of title block. So in the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to scroll down there. I'm going to create a graphic, but it's not going to be a picture. I'm going to make a rectangle, and into that I'm going to import a bit of a spreadsheet. So this is using Microsoft's object linking and embedding technology. So you need the source software to have made this in the first place. So I need to have Excel on this machine, or if it was Autodesk, I need to have AutoCAD. And so I'm going to choose an Excel spreadsheet whose print area I've set in advance. And then it's going to open Excel in the background, and it's going to embed that Excel sheet in here. Now I can edit that in Excel by double clicking on a blue editing handle, or there's a button. And so then I've just in Excel now doing the usual stuff, and it's disconnected from the project, and it's embedded, but it can't reference data in the project. And there are other ways of doing it where you can embed data from the project. So when I save and close that, then the data will get updated. And so you can change the scale of these things, and you've got to watch the scale because you can get some really bizarre situations. So and again, you can have any number of logos, and so it's just another graphic. You just want to say I'm just going to put a graphic up there. And if I'd had more time, I would have stolen your logo, but I didn't. So there we go. And again, you can force that to be maintain the proportions that your marketing department would dictate. So so all of that is a view. And so, that is what you'll see when you print it out. And the printout is exactly what you see on screen. So it's like WYSIWYG. We can make it fit to a single page. So we want to print it to a single page. We can do that, but it's going to reduce it to 68% of its original size. So it's good to try and print to design your view for a page size, and it's generally not going to scale it down too much, so that a 10-point font on screen will be a 10-point font on the page. So so looking at the body of this cell is a time distance cell, and this cell is a distance cell. So this is what I was saying at the beginning. We've made this view from different cells, and the time distance one is where we can locate activities. So first of all, I want to just talk very briefly about calendars. So there are calendars within Tilos. When you import data from P6, you will create the calendar that is in P6. The difference in Tilos is that calendars can have different non-working periods, and you can highlight them in different colors. So I've got green for weekends and blue for holidays, and I'm using just a 5-day bank holiday. So I can say, well, I don't want to see the weekends on screen or even have them present, so we'll just make those disappear, but the blue remains. And so this display tab just means I can turn lots of things on and off, don't have to see links. We'll talk about progressing later on, but I do want to display some grids, so I can make grids and edit grids, and I've done this already, but we can edit that, and we can have ones on the left hand side as well. So we'll talk about grid lines a little bit later on. So now I'm in the position to create an activity, and I want to do that by using Tilos itself. So you see how easy it is to do that. And I'm returning now to the topic of those task templates we spoke of earlier on in my little talk. So I've got a library of things that we've created in advance. And so I don't call them things like yellow rectangle or green triangle. It's usually like the process that you were doing. So we're going to do some topsoil stripping. So I've called it topsoil strip. I have defined that as a brown line. And so when I now create a task, which I can do by drawing, which is how I want to do it. So I click on this button, which gives me the opportunity of choosing a task template, which of course, as you can see, can be hierarchical. So even if I can't see the library, I can always access it. So you've got to choose the task template you use before you then create it. So if I go on the body of the diagram, hold down the mouse button and draw along, I'm now creating an activity. And as you can see, when it goes to a holiday, it's moving through time, but not through distance. So I can position that wherever I want graphically, and you've got the blue editing handles. So you've also got a editing toolbar on the top, and you've got this tab now with all the things about this activity. So its activity ID number, which would be keyed with one in P6, is this. You can have a different calendar. There are all sorts of functionality bits that we haven't got time to go into. But principally, I can say, well, I want this to be 25 days long, and I want it to start on the 4th of January. So now that's touching the edge of the screen, and I want a bit of space around there. So in the main cell itself, I can say, well, whilst the project starts at 0, I want the display to start at -1000. I want to have a couple of weeks before the start visible. I want to display it. And this is just creating space around the edge of the diagram, if you like. And it's good to do that because, as you'll see in a minute, so I want to say, well, actually, this starts at 0. and it goes to 15k, and it's going to take us 25 days. So, but how do I know what it is? Well, later on, I'm going to have a legend over here show me what things are. But we, unlike a Gantt chart, you do not have a spreadsheet section on the left-hand side where you can choose what to put. So we put, the technique is really you can only put text on the body of the diagram, and we do that through annotations. So a text annotation you can create by associating it with this activity, and we can say where it starts in relation to that activity and where the text box will be connected to the activity. And we'll look at that. This makes a bit more sense when you see it on screen. So I want something that's going to be connected to the center of the activity, and this is what it's going to say. And I don't want to type very much. I want to pick up data from the activity itself. So I'm going to press the F8 key because it's got a bit of help here. Insert text token by pressing the F8 key. So if I press F8, I get a list of data fields that I can access, like you would data fields you could put in a column in P6. So I'm going to choose to embed the name of this activity, and I'm going to proceed that with F8. I want to display the task ID reference number with a space. So if I say OK, then I've got a bit of text that, and the tab is selected. It's got the blue editing handles on it. The tabs below are about the piece of text. So if I pick that up and move it, you see that there's a little yellow pinhead and a dotted line. So the yellow pinhead is the connection point of this annotation. So if I wanted it at the start of the activity or the end of the activity, then that's what that's about. And how far we are away from the pinhead is this offset, and where it connects to the text box is this corner position. So if I want it to connect to the bottom center of the text box, then that would be the thing to do. And I can change the font face itself. So I want it to be a 10-point font. I don't want it to be bold. I don't want to see through it. So I want to change the background color to white. I could create a border around the outside in a black box. I don't think I want to do that this time. So the top left-hand color is in fact transparent. So then I can pick it up and move it, and you'll see in the position change as I do that. There is a little red dot in the corner, and you can rotate it through 360 degrees. And there is a special, well, you can define the angle, your own angle in that, but also you can click this thing that says apply slope of task. So this is really useful when you've got annotations associated with linear objects, because it will follow the slope of the line itself. So that's also useful. So I can have multiple annotations. I can have another annotation which I want to put on the end of the activity, and I want to give that a bit more information. So I'm going to say starts on, so I'm typing something, it's a narrative, F8, and then I'm going to close up the details group and say, well, I want to embed a date at that point. So from my date start schedule, and you've got to click on the plus sign, and then I've got access to some what we call annotation tokens. You can create your own. So I've got one which I've got day, month, year, but we could build up a date string from individual date. So I could just have the day of the week space or a dash, maybe F8, and the short month name. And then I'm going to put an @ symbol and press F8, and that I want to have now the start distance also displayed, and I can do that again in a number of units. So I could display that as 3 decimal place kilometers, but I've got to put the unit in. So you see, you can mix a narrative with data that you're getting from the activity itself. So should the activity change, then the annotations are always going to be correct. And that is, in my view, the best way of doing it, rather than you typing stuff in here and then if it changes, you need to change the text as well, and you'll never remember to do that. So this is laborious, as you can see, but there's a technique to sort of semi-automate this, as you'll see in a minute, for any new activities. So so it's inherited my my slopes. I don't want that. I want it to say 0, and I want it to be disconnected from there, and I can make that connection point permanent. So even if I click away, and you can see that maybe it's appropriate to give it a border at that stage as well. So if I move this activity, or this activity changes, you see the date, the end date changing in the annotation, for example, just as you would expect. And the trouble is, if I create another new activity based on the same task template, all of that's not there. I mean, I can steal them. I can copy the annotations from one task to another. But really what we want to do, they can be part of the task template itself, which Fanel and I were talking about just the other day. So with a task selected, I can go to the display tab and I can update what is in the library with the current settings of this task, including the task annotation. So when I next create a new task based on the same task template, then I've already got the annotation set up. So it's easier to delete them than it is to create them in the first place. So so it's a good technique to have that, but also you've got to be sparing with your occupying screen space. And if you get a lot of text, then you know, it can be confusing. So you do need to think about having shorter descriptions, because you don't need to say it's topsoil strip because it's a brown line. You're going to see that in the legend. So but that's a key skill, having that already in place, having a task template library that is preloaded with stuff that works quite well can save a huge amount of time, particularly if you're importing data. It can be populated and look really great quite quickly. You might have to move the text around if it's clashing. So now I just want to create a few more tasks and talk about some other features, because Tilos is not just a display tool like Chainlink. It is a superb display tool and far more flexible than other systems, and it's famed for its quality of presentation. But I'm going to create a second activity, which is going to be spoil removal. So again, I'm going to start at the beginning of the project, and I can freely draw all the way to the end. And I'm not going to worry so much about a duration on this one, because I want to just point out that we can calculate the duration of an activity. So we could either do that on some volume. So you could say, well, I've looked in the bill of quantities and there's going to be 10,000 cubic meters of spoil to remove, and we can do 3,420 per day. So per hour, that would be rather dramatic. So you can, right, that's because the quantity factor's 0, but the better way, another way of doing it, is to calculate it on the length of the activity. So we can do it on the length of the activity, and we can say, well, really that is, we know that that's 15k because that's what we've made it, and we're planning to do 276 linear meters a day, and if we do that, we can no longer edit the duration. The duration is calculated at 54.35 days. We can move it around, but we cannot change its duration. It's driven by that norm, and that is really useful in certain circumstances. and we can link these together. So you got all the link types that you would expect and one that you've never seen before. So I could say, well, when that one has started, this one can also start. So now the tab below is about a link, and we've got all the basic link types that you would expect. And then I can say, well, we don't want that to start for 10 days after the topsoil strip has started for some reason. We could have multiple, which is pretty essential, multiple links between two tasks. And again, we don't want the end, and obviously that's pretty redundant in this circumstance. So, so at any point I can reschedule, which would move things around. So if we said, well, this one, we can't start this one till a week later, then we can do a full critical path calculation and position it at another place. So it does have those abilities. You're not just moving things around, but there's another ability where if we have something that's static, and I'm going to choose a culvert, or this could be a bridge, or it could be a shaft meeting a tunnel, but you've got some object, some active process that is happening at a certain location. So at 2,850 meters into the job, for a length of 350 meters, we've got a culvert, reference 234, and really what we want to do is position that. As a planner, I want to position that so that it's in the optimum place. So if it was starting at that point, it would be too early because the spore removal hasn't happened to it. This has to happen before we can do the culvert. So we want it to happen sometime after that. So if it was this far away, then we could have done it sooner. So we want to calculate really where it's going to touch that line. And if you do that with traditional links, then that is just going to be a bit hit and miss. So so that looks to me to be around about 3 weeks into that activity. So if I say there's a start to start link between those two, there's 15 working days between it. Okay, I slightly undercooked that. So let's say 12, not bad. And so then, but later on, somebody says, well, we got a brand new bit of kit and we can really crack out this stuff. So we got a bigger capacity. So when I reschedule, it's still gonna, the culvert's not going to move because it's still got a fixed amount of time associated with it. So rather than doing it that way for static objects with linear processes associated, we can have lag not based on time. And this is a bit of a difficult thing for people schooled in P6 to accept, but we've got different ways of doing it. So it's still a start to start link, but we can choose distance to successor. So what that says is no part of this rectangle can touch any part of this line. So when we reschedule, it will always be in the perfect position. So if we were to say, well, actually, we can't get that bit of kit anymore, we've got to go back to the old way of doing it, and we reschedule, which F9 is the equivalent of, it's always going to be in the correct position. And if we had a safety measure in mind, such as we do in the rail industry, so I don't want that crew to start on that till this other crew are safely down the track, so there's a good separation between them, and so we can introduce that as an additional lag component. And just to make it dramatic, I want this other crew to be 500 meters down the track before we can start that activity. So we can give it a sort of bubble, which is a rather common phrase this week, for safety reasons, that prevents it happening. And we could display this, if that was the case, we could display this not as a line, but as a parallelogram with a 500-meter envelope around it to explain to people why that's not happening sooner. So Tilos has got all of these rather splendid abilities that some people use extensively and some people just use it for presentation purposes, but you're under using it to a certain extent by just using it for presentation purposes. So that's enough sort of data entry. This is a demonstration, not a training course. So I'm going to close that project and open one that I created previously. And look at a few other things. So this is the same thing, but just developed a bit further. This is what we cover in a standard training course. There's my legend to show you what these different things mean, represent, and it's just, you know, developed a bit further. And we've got additional activity types like hammocks and things you'd never seen in P6 called buffers, and intermediate tasks you used to have in P3 but don't have in P6 anymore. And some of these are driven by a rate of production, but there are other things that you can have. So in particular, people really quite like to have indicate something about the job in colored sections, and often this is so specific to the job. So these can often be, you know, in HS2 for example, where there's sort of deforestation needed along the route, or where there's particular ground conditions, or where the job's been chopped up into sections. And so this information is imported into Tilos into what's called a sector profile. So I've got this sector profile called sections, and I've had this as a spreadsheet, and it's just got a start distance and an end distance, and I've imported that by saying which bit of data was in which column. So so I copy that to clipboard, I go in here, set the import profile to be what I want, and it will populate that. And also in the library, I've set what's called a sector type, which is to say that I want section A to be blue and section B to be green. So you can set these things up in advance. And also we can have something called a distance profile, which is where you've only got a single distance value. So something like, I want to also indicate the bridges, because there's 4 bridges on this job, and this will help us see where they are. And this is all about communicating the job, but also helping the planning. And this is so commonly used. Pipelines use this all the time. So you've got river crossings, road crossings, under crossings, over crossings, and you can indicate them all on separate lines. And then they don't have regular grid lines, they get irregular grid lines, because we can include these values on the grid line set. So I've got a orange line indicating where things are, and so all of that is useful, and you can extend that. So I've got another one called land height and road height, where I've got every 100 meters, I've got a existing ground level measurement and a finished road level, and I can include that as a graphic. If I can, oh yeah, I'm on the wrong view for that. So that's my view with profiles. So I've included a section here, which is a graph. It's a graph inside Tilos. It's not a graphic that I've included. It's a profile diagram where I've defined what it is that I want to, what value is going to come out of this distance axis. So I can then take the 2 away, and I can color up the bits so the cut is green and the fill is blue, for example, in that example. So some of those things are dramatically useful. And the other use for it is we don't have to have a linear rate of production. So you saw how we could say, rather than giving the duration of this, I said it was 25 days. I could say, well, but I want to calculate a duration of that based on the fact that we can do 500 linear meters a day, as we've discussed, but it doesn't have to be the whole length of the activity. You can also have a distance profile where you say, well, between these values, there's a certain percentage of work rate that can be achieved, or you might have a physical amount of work. So if you're doing a pipeline and you're drilling through rock and then sand and then clay and then mud, you can go at a different rate. So we can reference data in a distance profile. We of course have to choose the distance profile that we're interested in, and then we can say that you can now see that that is no longer a straight line, that it's got a shape to it, and that's reflected the productivity that's accurate across the whole length. Now, you would almost certainly chop that up into about 20 separate activities in P6, and you would lose the ability to do that. But it is packed with those sort of features that are appropriate in a if you're thinking about a linear plan and how the things that you would want to do that. So I thought it was worth showing that information. In the presentation, we touched on the fact that you can have resources and costs. You can have fixed costs, you can have labor costs, and I've got a view set up to describe that. So in the library, just like sort of task templates, so in the bottom section, I've got a whole section to define resources, which I can break into hierarchical structure, both machines and material. So you can set those up. You can have headings to collect money into or assign money from. So you can just say this thing is going to be 20 grand rather than, or you can say that a cubic meter of concrete is X and a operator is so much an hour, etc. So you can set these things up in the library. They have to be in the library. They are imported if you bring them in from P6. And so if we take an activity has got an allocations tab. So in this case, I've assigned 3 operators and a foreman to this particular activity, and they can have all sorts of behaviors in how they drive, whether they drive the duration of the activity or whether there's a fixed number of hours if the activity duration changes. And there's a lot of sophistication under the hood about resources, but with the and we can do a global allocation and we can do a global change. So there's a more of a sort of P6 approach to global change, so we can do that to things or filter out subgroups and do it to those. But we can graph it in a number of ways. We can graph it here as a capacity for an individual resource, so we choose individual resources and we can graph that. We can apply a different color scheme to it. There is no resource leveling in Tilos. There's very good resource reporting. So so that's the way of approaching it. And on the right hand side, I've got another graph which is showing me the total number of men per month, a peak number of men per month, and the total man hours per month, which is the cumulative blue line. And I defined all of this in the setup. So all of that is possible within Tilos, and whatever you see on screen is what you're going to get when you print it out. So so you've got those abilities as well. So so that could be money, or it could be materials. So it could be cubic meters of concrete or what have you. So so I'm going to go back to this view and I'm going to talk about import export briefly. So so what is a useful companion to Tilos is Excel as a productivity aid. So I think it's a good way of just introducing the concept of import export, because that's how Tilos gets data in and out. So I'm going to export the information first of all, and then there's a number of formats, and we could do it in Microsoft Project XML, P6 XML, Power Project XML, all of which you've got to pay for, or we can stick it on the Windows clipboard, which everybody gets as standard. Now you've just purchased this, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I choose the root of data, where it's coming from or to. We can write it to a file, or we can put it or take it from the clipboard. Excuse me. which is what I'm going to do. And then we can choose or create what's called an exchange profile. So got a new installation. I haven't done one on this. So I'm going to say I'm making a new one, which I'm going to call basic data exchange. And basically, I'm going to choose the data that I want to import and export from Tilos activities. What's the date format we want to use, and that's crucial. Then we can go behind tasks and say, well, what is it from all the data fields we've got in tasks that we want to export or import? So what we clearly need to do is have, I want the name of the activity. The ID number is always there. So double clicking on the list, I want the start date and distance of the activity, and whilst I'm down here, I also want the task template name, so I can say if it's a yellow rectangle or a green triangle, and then I want to also have the end date and the end distance, and that would be the basic subset that I need. We can have a layer name so we can turn things on and off, and I can organize these, so it's probably, I'm just a bit OCD, so I like to group things together neatly. So I'm going to put the dates together, distance together, template name. So this is the column that it's going to be in Excel. We can edit that number here and skip columns, but we would have this set up in advance generally. And so when I say, okay, it's just in the library, I can use it. So then I click on finish. So it's put that information, in this case, on the clipboard. It could have written it to a file, and that could be, that's the sort of, you'll see in a minute, that's the sort of P6 approach. So then I'm going to start Excel, which is, here we go. So it's on the clipboard. So I'm going to, oh, must have clicked it twice. So I'm going to paste it. So there's the information that was in Tilos. So I'm going to move it so you can see that both on screen at the same time. So we're going to key on the ID number. So as long as the ID numbers, if the ID number is the same and we change something, so for example, that first culvert, which was 452 here, maybe we got the distance wrong, and in fact it's at 4100 to 4500. So we can make a change to something that is already exists, and then because it already exists, it will make that update, or we can add something that wasn't there before. So if I had another culvert that had been introduced, I've got to change the ID number, otherwise it would be overwriting the first one. And I can say that that is on the 11th of January 21 to the 21, and it's at 1200 to 1600 chainage, and it's a culvert. So having made some information, and I could start with it like this and just import it. So with that on the clipboard, I go back to Tilos and I go File, Import. So the opposite route. Where's it coming from? Plain text. Next, I can see it's on the clipboard. I get some preview of that. I choose the same set of rules about what data's on what column, and if you didn't, it could all go wrong. And then it tells you that it's updated some tasks and it's found there's probably some spelling difference in the library. So there's the new task that we've just created. It didn't exist before, and this one has been moved to a new location where it wasn't previously. So all of which I don't want to do, so I can just undo that. So when it comes to other systems which have got more information in them, like got logic links, etc. So we need to, and I've only got a new machinery, so I haven't got everything that I used to have. So, but here is a you recognise as P6. So you've got to choose. You've got to have somewhere in P6 where you put in the start and end change. So you're going to have to type it in and say, this is between 1200 and 1750. So you've got to. There's no way out of that, and generally, people do that in a, if I can remember where that is, user-defined field. So I would say it's a good thing, rather than everybody doing their own thing, it's good to have some global setup that everybody just uses. And it could use the same, because you must do this for chain link as well. So you could use the same start and end distance value. I tend to use text because then if you get floats and you get decimal places and things, international commas and dots, and you've got to really know what you're doing to get that. Then of course you've got things that you want to reference. So again, how do we reference the task template? Is this a culvert? Is it a yellow box? Is it a brown line? Well, then we need to make an activity code library that has got the same entries into it as you've got in that we've already had before. So in there we've got one called I'm not familiar with driving P6, so this is and because P6 has got these restrictions about the length of the name, so you've got unlimited description, but a pretty severely limited value field, and it's the value field that will be exchanging in the XML file. So so we want to be able to choose a code activity assignment, and so again, that's something. So you're going to have to do that in P6 by making all the activities have a task template reference and a start and end change. That's the minimum. Everything else is going to come out of P6. So generally speaking, in a large P6 program, you don't want everything there. So you can have another user-defined field where you say anything with a Y in it will be imported. Anything without that won't, because we're going to save this as, we're going to export it as a XML file, not XER, but XML, and everything in the project goes into the XML file. So if you don't want everything in Tilos, then we can extract only the ones that you want. And there is a very detailed movie of, if I can find where I put that, which is on YouTube, about how you do each step of that. So we can also have a quantity field, and there's a sort of so you can have me talking for 18 minutes to describe exactly how you connect those things together. So so you've got a code P6 up, you save it to an XML file, and then in Tilos we then go file, import P6 next, and then we've got a where's the data coming from, where's that XML file? So that's got to be somewhere you can get to, and then you've got to say, well, where are our activities codes, task templates? Are they in a user-defined field? Are they an activity code library? If so, what is the name of that library? Is there a filter that we're running? So we want to say anything from the UDF export that's got a yes in it will be included. Do we want to have categories, Tilos calls, other activity code libraries categories? Do we want the logic links? Do we want the resources? If we do, we've got to give it a calendar. And then there's some additional fields about where is what do we want to map this to in P6. So this needs to be set up, and it is remembered from the last time you did it. So it's worth having some standards, and you can say everybody can save some time by it just being done once. So that's what I wanted to talk about, import export. I must say I thought I would have been interrupted by now, but I've got three other things to talk about, and I will take questions, but obviously this is a wide-ranging presentation. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is progressing. So it's a difficult topic, but one in which Tilos has got a unique, again, a unique angle on. And that is, so with this project, this is what we're going to do. And what we can do is we can baseline that. So we're not baselining absolutely everything, but just enough to do earn value on. So I can create multiple baselines, but I can have a new one. In this case, this is my original plan. So I can make it active or not active. I can choose to display it or not display it. But also at this point, I also set the data date. So I'm going to say, well, we're a month in, and I'm recording progress for that month. So I have chosen the progress line. So again, I can choose that in the setup to be this blue line with blue arrowheads on it. So that line separates the past from the future. So if we look at an activity, we select an activity, it's worth just looking at the progress tab a minute, because unusually we've got different ways of potentially progressing a task. So we can progress it by a percentage, which is appropriate for non-linear activities and linear activities to a certain extent. We can have a quantity split. So we've done 700 out of 8,060 things. Or we can have a distance split, or we can have task stages, steps, like you have in P6. So because this is a distance task, it's appropriate for a distance split. So if we know what we're doing with the buttons, but it's easier to explain it if I go to the data entry dialog. So where that progress line cuts that activity is around about 9K. So that is what this is saying. At the report date, which we could change here, we work constantly between the start date and the when we finish this activity. And what was planned to happen was that we should have got to 10K. What I want to know is, where did you get to? So, and this is where it can get really interesting. So in fact, we couldn't get into the first bit of the job because the access was denied because they haven't yet got permissions. So we didn't start until 1K into the job, and that disruption means we've only got to 8,450 meters along the job. So you got a physical measure about where you got. You're not arguing about whether you've done 37% or something. So we can break out the bit that's been done, and I forgot to adjust what happens to the annotations at that point. So they get cloned, but I generally don't want them to be cloned. So those activities that are completed, I'm showing as being crossed out. There's various ways of demonstrating progress, but it is tricky, a slightly tricky subject on a time distance diagram. So we can do a sort of highlighter pen background, or so I've got a bit of the task here that hasn't been done. I've got this bit of task that is an actual as built, and I've got a bit of the task sticking into the past. So it knows exactly where we were. We know exactly what we've worked to, and this is yet to be done. So let's just continue that theme. So the better news was that we because we started later, we could get into that one. So I'm going to progress that as though we have done everything that we should. Well, maybe we're just slightly shy. We got to 5K, and we should have started the culvert, and we have. So so when we've got, and so this is a non-linear task, so we should have done up to that point. That point represents 8%. We've worked between these. This is the actual start date. This is the actual end date of that bit, or if you like, the resume date of the next bit. So we chop up activities into little pieces, representing what they've done. And this is where you start to upset something like P6. If we reschedule that now, we could link this one to this one, for example, if we're going to go back. But you can demonstrate that sort of disruption to work patterns and the lack of productivity. And so you clearly build up this fantastic as-built program. And we've got a progress KPI section on the right-hand side, which we can populate as well. And so you can also show the baseline. But of course, you've got 2 of everything, and it can be even more confusing than and it's probably better to put it in the annotations, because you've got end date variance and all those sorts of things. But now you know, if you imported that from P6, it would know nothing about when you did things, where you've done things. It would just say you've done 20% of the topsoil strip. You wouldn't know that you haven't done that bit over there. So as soon as you start mapping what really happened on the ground, then it becomes almost impossible to exchange data really with another system. So you've got to think about those complexities if you're going to progress it in that way, which is generally what people do. So pipelines, the crew boss every day says what they've done. There's a little feature called micro progress. You can track exactly what was done every day, and you know, this becomes the driving sequence. So so that's, having dropped that little hand grenade into the conversation, I'm going to close that and open another one. I want to talk about mass haul for a moment. So there is the feature in standard Tilos, not an add-on, where you can create in a distance cell, you can nominate that a distance cell is a mass haul diagram, and then into the library you can enter, but more likely import on the distance component of that, mass area. So so somebody's chopped it up into how they anticipate it to be located. So I've got a little plus sign for a decimal point between kilometers and meters here, which is how I prefer to do it. So this section of work starts at 0, goes to 300 meters, and there's 10,900 cubic meters of stuff, and you can say what that stuff is as well. So and the type of stuff is going to be cut, and so we also define that in advance in the library. So in the other sections at the bottom, there are fundamental mass types. So this is whether it's rock cut or rock fill or crush, or you know, make a mass pit somewhere of topsoil, or so generally they're imported. You could draw them in Tilos, but I've never seen anybody do that. They've got this information elsewhere. You can import it, and you can also import the haulages, but really what the diagram is helping you do is think through where these things go to. So when we say we've got this amount of cut, where are we going to put it? Well, we're going to take it to the nearest fill, so we can graphically, and so it knows that we're going to move 400 meters because it can calculate that. We know where it is in distance. So, and we know the quantity because we've already said that. So all of that can go into this fill area. And so the purple sort of temperature gauge says, well, great, okay, you filled up quite a lot of it, but it's not full yet. So you can see which bits are not full, etc. So we can then we can take the rest of that, we can put all of that in there, and there are all sorts of values to set: shrinkage, compaction factors, and so we've now filled that up. So I've set these other ones before, so we're taking this rock to the crusher, and then the crusher's going to fill it up here, but we're still slightly shy, so we have to import some material to complete out. So that diagram is useful to interact with, and but also we can use those to create activities. So this haulage has got an action of, you've got to cut it, move it over there, and then fill. So there's a process, and there's essentially two tasks: is cut and fill. So I can select a line, I can right mouse click and say, well, I want to create a pair of activities that are going to start on this particular date, let's say. So there they are. So if we look at that, there's my cut activity. Well, why is it 7 days long? Well, if I look at the calculation tab, it's got a quantity that it's inherited from the amount of material that we've said we're going to cut, and we've got a standard work rate, and we've got it knows what the whole distance is. You know, we can factorize all these things, and so it's set the duration from the quantity of work. So if the quantity of work were to change, it would change the duration of the activity. And also there's a period involved, because we know how far it is that you're going to haul it. It's going to locate it at this point here. So it gives us a pair of activities. Now we could do that not just for, if I undo that, not just for one. So if I select one line, do Control A, so I've selected all lines, I can, if you like, mass create as a starting point. As a planner, I would like to adjust that. We've got the activities that have been done in that way. So we can, and then that's our mass haul section, and then we're kicking off with all of the other base courses and curbs and everything else later on. So that mass haulage abilities are quite strong. You know, particularly you can see the use of, you know, the cut and fill volumes per time on the left, and you've got sort of useful graphs that it's not my specialist area of expertise, but all of which I'm told are extremely useful. So we can import this information as a starting point from Trimble Business Center that's got a cost optimization abilities for mass haul. So fundamentally, that's the reason that Trimble bought Tilos, so that it can give a scheduling ability to the time aspect, and it's starting to be hooked up to the Trimble 3D civils graphical CAD systems as well. So that's the next major step that's underway presently. So that's the last thing I want to talk about for most people, but I know Michelle had an interest in some other specialist uses, and so probably the largest users of Tilos in the world are applying it to pipelines, but the next largest are applying it to railways. And there are two types of railways. There are big new railways, which we don't do much of, obviously with the exception of Crossrail and HS2 recently. But what we do a hell of a lot of is mending the ones that are already there to keep the whole thing running. And they try and do it out of hours. And so Tilos have got some particularly unique aspects about this. So this is a view that I've made before, that you can see. We can do yards, chains, and miles, all that sort of stuff. And the blue line, the green lines down the screen is the extent of the job site that we're working in. I need to also just activate another spreadsheet that I had, so I'll come to that in a minute. So in this section of the plan up here, people also make a map, but these maps can often be symbolic. So you can not just we can say, well, the work area, I want to occupy this physical space. So we can, and this is where the symbols in the library come from. You can make these symbols with a graphic editor within within Tilos. So I've got something called work site, which is just a sort of rectangle. So that's positioned, and we know exactly where it is and exactly how long it is. And so we can position it exactly, and people know where their assets are on the route. So what tends to be an easy way of doing it is to build a spreadsheet where we've got the name of the symbol in our library. What you're giving it is the yellow ones. What's its name? Where's it start? How long is it? And then these other standard settings. So I can copy that to the library, right mouse click, and I can import those into Tilos from the symbols, and it positions those in exactly the right place. And then we want to create the activities, and I do not want to create them one at once, which I can do because I've got this huge library of standard production rates. But there's another way, and I mentioned right at the beginning, not only have we got task templates, we've got something called task groups, and these are fragnets of standard ways of doing things, and you can edit them to create them, obviously. But then we can say, well, I don't want to create a new task, I want to create a new group, and that group is going to start at midnight on the 6th of September, and it's going to go between those green lines, and we can snap to those lines. So I want to do it by coordinates. So here's this, it's snapped to those lines. And when do we want to start it? We want to start it at midnight on that date. And so then it's going to go away and say, well, look, they're all of the activities that you told us were represented, and all of the logic that lies between them, and they've been scaled to fit in the distance footprint that you wanted them to fit into. Now we can start to adjust them if things are slightly different. We can say, well, we're not doing 10 lengths an hour, we're only going to do 9 lengths an hour because of the working conditions. And we're going to see what impact that has in a reschedule. But also in this case, this is the piece of machinery that's got a locomotive, and it's got a number of wagons, and it's full up of base stone. So there are some very sophisticated modeling. This is a ballast train, and it's being pulled, not pushed, by a locomotive. And those wagons and locomotives are resources in the plan. And in the resource library, they've got a length, a weight, a storage capacity, and a number of axles defined. So I've got a locomotive, and I've got a falcon that's a name of a wagon, and it can hold 54 cubic meters of material. And for the amount of work we've got to do, I need 20 of those wagons. And so the annotation is telling you what 20. If in the calculator, so there's a ballast calculator depending on how deep it is and all that stuff, which spits out a value, and they put that value in here. So that's now saying, well, okay, for that amount of material, you only need 14 wagons. And that length of the tail of it is how long the train is, because that's where it's sitting on the track, and that's going to have an impact on the next thing that's going to happen. So very, very quickly, you can have a whole possession plan, and I just rescheduled it, and we can see the result of that. And so we're going to return the work site at 10:30 on the Sunday night, which is good, and we can export that information in a special XML format for the network rail risk tool, and these have all got resources on them, as you've seen. And in this resource histogram here, I can generate from the data that's already there, I can generate a column for every resource, so we can see how many wagons people we want, and that's what we see on the plan. But also they're not going to bother exporting that to P6 or Microsoft Project, so there's a quite reasonable Gantt chart available in the system, which is just another view. So so that's a more specialist use of Tilos than you would have seen before. So here endeth the presentation.